Look at this. What the hell is this? This is what those boomers call a DVD collection, or Blu-ray or VHS or whatever the hell. We all know someone who still has one, but let's be honest, hardly anyone today still owns and uses a physical library for music, movies, or television. And the reason is pretty simple. It's hard to justify leaving your house, driving to the store, and buying a physical item, whereas I could just click a button and enjoy the content I want to see on the same screen upon which I enjoy said content. Digital media is coming into its own, and there are really only three formats still hanging on to their physical libraries: vinyl, books, and video games. Let's take a look at what's keeping them alive. Vinyl is the oddball of this list, as it's a subgenre of musical mediums, but I still think it's worth mentioning. A turntable in itself is more of a piece of decor, a conversation starter that says a little something about your personality. The idea of using your turntable at parties or whenever you invite people into your home creates a large need to have more vinyls you can showcase, producing a collectible culture unseen in most other mediums. It's what allows vinyl shops to still be alive in some downtown areas, while family videos and blockbusters are simply dead. Everyone has a TV, but only some people have a turntable, and a turntable is only cool if you pair it with a thick record. Now when it comes to books, I think it's ironic how this is the first form of media to be mass-produced, and yet will likely hold onto its physical media the longest. Why? Well, to start, bookstores usually have an environment that keeps its audience coming back. It can be fun to go into a bookstore and get lost in the jungle of literature, trying to stumble upon a gem you might want to read. You look at Barnes & Noble, and they have definitely been successful at creating an environment its customers want to be in. A Starbucks for the coffee heads, and a toy section for those who have kids. It all works to keep people coming in and buying more books. Now when it comes to the book itself, it really is made for the physical medium, no matter how hard Amazon tries to negate that with Audible and Kindles. A book is the one form of media that has no filters. When you read a book, it is a direct line of communication between the author and the reader, just words on a page. Film, music, and other mediums may have more tools to tell the story, but other factors such as collaboration, budget, circumstance, and other technicalities can also hinder that work. What this means for books is that it takes much more participation from the reader to consume the material, as there is less to engage said reader. Hence, reading is a challenge. This is, in my opinion, the biggest reason books are still largely bought physically. The smell and weight of the book and the act of turning the page while engrossed in a novel are all incentives that reward the reader and encourage further reading. No one ever feels proud that they just watched a blockbuster like Avatar, but people do feel a sense of accomplishment after reading a novel. And that sense of accomplishment would not feel nearly as empowering if it weren't for the reader physically flipping through all the pages themselves. Last but not least, we have video games, the newest form of entertainment. At first glance, it would seem that the pros and cons of physical versus digital for video games are the same as those experienced with movies, but there are actually more pros that come with a physical copy of a video game as opposed to a physical movie. You can trade physical movies just how you can with games, except games are a much more expensive commodity, retailing for about $60 on average, with many AAA titles now retailing for the base price of $70. When it comes to a video game that costs that much, many people, myself included, like the ability to return the game for money, and also buy a used copy of the game for a cheaper price. Returning video games are a big deal. After all, that is the entire business model that GameStop profited off of for as long as it did. And that right there is the reason physical video games are dying as quickly as they are. Video games are expensive to buy, but they are also expensive to make, with immensely high production and marketing costs. Now on top of that, if a game publisher is making a physical copy of a game, they also have to pay for manufacturing, shipping, and retail costs, which brings their profits down. Thus, for the last decade, games companies have been at war with physical games media. Back in 2008, games publisher Electronic Arts, or EA,
It's in the game.
introduced online passes in the sale of their games, which was a one-time code used to unlock the game's online content for the specific console you were using. What this meant was that it was now impossible for someone to buy said game pre-owned, as they would not have the code to access the online features. Then, in 2013, we had the release of the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. Prior to the release of these consoles, Microsoft announced that they would be restricting the ability for Xbox One users to trade their games with friends. This caused a huge backlash, and the Xbox policy was later reversed. Sony even capitalized on the controversy by showing how you could trade PlayStation 4 games with a friend.
This is how you share your games on PS4. Thanks.
Despite the controversy here, it was during the lifespan of both the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 when physical games media would really start to die. The general consumer, despite hitting the Xbox One with backlash for the anti-physical policy, would slowly start to disdain physical games for a more subtle reason. The culprit here was those game publishers. Over time, the storage size of games grew bigger, and simultaneously, games companies stopped compressing the file size of their games. So, when consumers used to be able to pick up a game from the store, take it home, put the disc in the console, and immediately start playing, they now still had to wait for the game to install onto their system's hard drive before being able to play. For example, back in 2014 when I first got my Xbox One, the first game I picked up physically for this system was a game called Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare. I had to wait several hours for the game to install onto the Xbox before I could play it. Now keep in mind, the game itself was 15 gigabytes, and a Blu-ray disc could hold up to 50 gigabytes at the time. This meant that game publishers were producing physical games where the disc was only an unlock key to install the game. Over time, this slowly manipulated customers who would have otherwise purchased their game physically into buying the game digitally instead, allowing game publishers to make more money. Now both physical and digital games took up space on their respective systems. Speaking of space, video games do take up a huge amount of it, and to increase the amount of space on your console or PC to make room for games costs a lot of money. Hundreds of dollars worth. This could of course be avoided on a streaming service, but as of yet, companies have not successfully made a video game streaming service. Google has tried with their Stadia platform, but it's clear that the technology is simply not there yet. However, Xbox has created the next best thing with their Game Pass, a subscription service that allows you to download any of the games offered in the service's library. Still, for most games, the ability to permanently own, sell, or buy at a cheaper price is something many people are losing the ability to do, and they might not miss it until it's too late. This is not to mention playing games in a situation where you may not have access to good internet. But who can really blame you for buying the new generation's digital-only consoles? You may be giving up a lot of that freedom I mentioned earlier, but is that freedom really going to hold up next to $100 or $200? When movie and TV streaming services were first introduced, they were so exciting because of the freedom they brought from cable television, both in its cheaper pricing as well as ease of access to content. However, the sheer amount of streaming services popping up and they're constantly raising prices means that soon enough all these reasons most people left cable will be alive within streaming services themselves. The reason I mentioned video games last is because it's the best example of how this innovation for our entertainment acts as a double-edged sword. Digital and streaming offer lots of benefits and convenience, but understand that the cost of your subscription is more than just a monthly fee.